Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we are going to share scary Skinwalker horror stories. First story. I think I met a Skinwalker. Growing up in Arizona, myths and legends are a part of life. Native traditions, mystic places, vortexes, UFO abductions, and dozens of other stories of the unknown that I always found fascinating. I grew up spending a lot of time wandering around the desert and the mountains, hunting, camping, etc., so I felt very at home in the wilderness. One late spring day, on one of my many hiking adventures, I wandered off trail and after several hours came upon a small group of old mud adobe houses. A few people heard me coming and came out of the houses to investigate, and after apparently making the collective decision that I was not a threat, one of the elders dressed in old-style traditional native clothing and a headdress came over to greet me. The man spoke slowly and told me that I had wandered onto a Navajo reservation and asked me if I was lost or if I needed help. When I told him no, I was lost, but intentionally, he chuckled and invited me in to eat with his family. The next several hours were one of the great experiences of my life. The whole thing was like being thrown back in time. While we ate and talked, others from the surrounding houses began coming over to join us, and I got the feeling they didn't get many outside visitors. We shared stories for hours about life, family, theater history in the area, and time spent in the wild, and the longer we talked, the more they opened up and the more interesting the elder stories got. Throughout the time, there was one man who never spoke. He just sat out of the circle listening and watching me. At one point, I told him I did what I call my walkabouts every year around September, where I would go out by myself into the wilderness for 2 to 4 weeks at a time, and this got the attention of the one silent old man. When I finished, he came over to the circle around the fire, sat directly on the ground in front of me, and asked me to join him on the ground. He told me that years ago he used to do the same thing, and went on to tell me about the canyon he went to. He described it as a dangerous but magic place, and that I would see the world differently if I came back. If must be for dramatic effect. When he finished, he invited me over to his home. The house was small, and through an open door in the back room, I could see it was filled with various animal pelts, coyotes, and wolves mostly. He walked over and closed that door, then picked up and handed me an old map and some written directions that seemed like he had been holding on to them for a long time, and just walked away into that back room and closed the door behind him. It was late, and one of the families had invited me to stay the night, which I gladly did. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, one of the old women came over to me with something in her hands, handed me a talisman, and simply said, "Dip your bullets in the white ash at the hottest part of the fire," then just walked away. September came, and as I packed for my walkabout, I saw the talisman in a drawer, and something felt right about taking it with me. After a beautiful drive, I was very happy to find a Forest Service road marked on the old map. The entrance to the area was remote and overgrown and tough to get to even in my Jeep, and took me much longer to get to than expected, so I decided to make camp and start the hike in the morning. After a few hours on a trail that looked like it had been forgotten, I came to a stream and the entrance to the secret valley. It was a narrow crack in the tall cliffs with about 4 feet of water running gently through, but too narrow for a kayak or canoe. I hoisted my gear over my head and began to wade sideways through the chest-deep water. The crack in the cliffs seemed to go on forever, but after almost 2 hours, I came to the place where it opened up into a small lake in an incredible valley surrounded by tall rock faces. This may have been the most remote place I have ever been, in the sense that there was no sign that people had ever been there. No trash, no bullet casings, not even the evidence of campfires. My first night, there was the quietest night I have ever spent in the wild. No birds, no frogs, not even crickets, but I didn't feel like I was alone there. In the morning, after breakfast, I headed out on my first exploratory hike to explore my new home for the next couple weeks. After being stalked by a mountain lion on a hike about 10 years ago, I make a point of now bringing a pistol with me when I'm out wilderness hiking. After some looking around, I found a narrow path that appeared to be a game trail that lead up the side of one of the cliffs and towards what looked like caves from the canyon floor. I made my way up to them and came upon an entrance that was much larger than it appeared from below. I made some noise to alert any possible animals I was there and made my way inside. The cave was an expansive single chamber that went back a couple 100 feet. As I walked, I inspected as much as I could see with my light, but there was no tracks of any kind in the dirt besides mine, so I decided I was alone in there and pushed on towards the rear of the cave. As I came around the last bend in the cave and approached the end, my headlamp panned across a large pile of bones, some animal, some human, and a very old-looking small candle sitting on a natural stone shelf. This is the first thing that has scared me in as long as I can remember. But focusing my wits, I remembered that there was no other tracks in the cave and figured it was all from a long time ago. I was still a little uneasy as I exited the cave and was ready to get back to camp. As I came out into the light, about 75 feet away, there was the largest wolf I have ever seen that looked like it was coming down from standing on its hind legs. It dropped down to all fours on a rock, just began staring at me, not growling or baring its teeth, just staring. I pulled my .45 and fired 2 shots up to the side of it to scare it away, but it didn't even flinch. Not only have I never seen a wolf in this part of northern Arizona, but I have never seen a wild animal that did not at least flinch at the sound of a gunshot. We both stood there staring at each other for a moment. I turned and set my backpack down to grab my binoculars and get a little closer look, but when I turned back, the wolf was gone. I made my way cautiously down the path back towards camp. I have encountered wolves before, and usually it's not the one wolf you can see that should worry you. It's the ones you can't see. So I was extra cautious for the return trip. Back at camp, I made sure my gun was fully loaded and got my recurve bow strung just in case the wolves came back. I have seen plenty of predatory animals on my adventures. It's a part of being in the wilderness, so I wasn't too worried, just prepare myself the best I could and went over to the lake to go fishing. Within about 20 minutes, I caught 2 of the biggest brown trout I've ever caught, so I decided to stop fishing for the day and take a swim. Back at camp, I made a fire, cleaned my trout, and made dinner while the sun went down. As soon as the sun went down, all of the life in the canyon seemed to go silent again. As I put out my fire and prepared for bed, I noticed there was a small flicker of light coming from the area where the cave I had explored earlier up the cliffside, which didn't make sense. It was a moonless night, and stars don't reflect that way. It couldn't have been a candlelight scene. It was too old and would not have burned so bright. I decided to keep my gun close and try to get some sleep. I would investigate the cave again the next day. When I woke at sunrise, there was a haze along the ground throughout the whole canyon floor, but as the sun rose it disappeared quickly, and the area came back to life. I made my breakfast, gathered my gun and bow, and headed back up towards the cave. When I reached the entrance, I saw there were still no tracks besides mine around the entrance and decided to push up the hill further. Just a little further up, I came upon the entrance to another cave, much smaller than the first one. There was a small flat landing with a large, heavily twisted juniper tree that, to my absolute surprise, had many small objects hanging from thin, old-looking ropes tied to the branches. There were bones, but there were also old things definitely made by humans and looked like they were old Native American artifacts. Thinking I might have found the spot where the old man I met on the reservation had stayed when he was there decades ago, I went into the cave. This cave was much different from the first one. Just a few feet in, I noticed the walls were covered in what looked like ceremonial cave paintings. As I pushed further back, the cave got dramatically colder, much colder than it should have been, and the walls were completely covered with the paintings the entire way. When I reached the back of the cave, I was not prepared for what I saw. There was what looked like an old altar made of wooden bones. As I looked around, I saw that a little before the back of the cave, there was another shaft in the ceiling that went up, and on a ledge about 25 feet up sat the small figure of what appeared to be a woman. She was small and pale with her face painted white, and wearing something like a crown made of woven branches with 2 small antlers at the front. I stopped and stared for a few minutes, and the figure did not move, so I assumed that it was mummified remains from a long time ago. Not wanting to disturb a burial site, I turned to walk back out of the cave, but I began to walk. I heard what sounded like a faint voice in an unknown, ancient language. I instinctively looked back up toward the figure, but it was gone. I was immediately terrified and ran from the cave as fast as I could get out, but my headlamp flickered and died. I made my way out, feeling along the wall to find my way, and the whole way, I felt like there was something right behind me. When I saw the first light from the cave entrance, I began to sprint towards it. Just before I made it out, I looked back and there was nothing, so I slowed down, but I could still hear the faint voice and the volume never changed. When I got outside, all the bones and artifacts hanging from the tree were gone. I ran down the path as fast as I could, headed back to my campsite by the lake. Just as I reached the floor of the canyon, I noticed a large wolf at the tree lean to my left, but this time it stayed standing upright on its hind legs. I stopped running, hoping to not initiate its predatory response to chase me, and again, it just stood there staring at me. I reached my campsite safely and immediately began packing up. It was too late in the day to make it out before dark, and I did not want to make the hike out at night with all that was going on. I moved my tent so it would back up to the canyon wall by the crack in the cliffside, so I didn't have to worry about anything sneaking up behind me. I built my fire much larger and knew I wasn't going to get any sleep that night. Just as the sun was going down, I began to hear noises coming from the trees, and I felt like I was being hunted. Finally, in the last light of day, I saw the wolf slowly walking around by where the path lead out of the trees, and it began to slowly walk towards me. This time I drew my gun and fired towards the creature, intending to hit it, and while I saw a couple hit the dirt around it, several bullets hit it. Several rounds from a .45 will at least slow down anything I've ever encountered, but this giant wolf kept walking towards me like nothing had happened. I continued to fire at it until the inevitable click of an empty magazine. I reached down and fumbled around in my backpack, looking for my other magazines to reload, and as I lifted it, the talisman the old woman gave me fell out onto the ground. I picked it up and put it around my neck and immediately remembered what she had told me. Dip your bullets in the white ash. I looked around but didn't see my backup magazines, so I grabbed my bow, pulled an arrow that was tipped with a hunting broadhead, and dipped it into the white ashes, drew and fired. I hit the creature just in front of its right hip, and it let out a noise somewhere between a growl and a person screaming that made my blood curdle. I can hear that noise in my head to this day. It immediately turned and ran back to the trees, and in the flicker of the firelight, I saw the small women with the antler crown standing there waiting for it. They both retreated into the trees, and for the rest of the night, I could hear the same faint voice I had heard in the cave. I spent the night outside of my tent, as awake as I have ever been, but no longer afraid, and at dawn finished packing up so I could get out of that canyon. The next spring, I went back to the small group of houses on the Navajo reservation I had found a year before. I was wearing the talisman as a necklace, and the first person to greet me was the woman who had given it to me, and she ran up to give me a big hug. "You heard me," was all she said. I asked the group about the man who had given me the map, as I was almost desperate to talk to him about the experience I had so I could compare it to his own. They told me that he had disappeared shortly after I had visited them the first time and had not been back. Strangely, when I tried to tell them what had happened to me, no one would let me tell the story, and the oldest man there who sat in the corner kept mumbling the words, "Ye naldla shiai." We all once again sat and shared other stories of life and a meal. Before I left the next morning, I found the old woman who had given me the talisman and offered it back to her. She smiled and told me I had a good heart, then just closed my hand around it, telling me to keep it to watch over my next walkabout. I went back to that small village on the reservation several times over the next 10 years or so till I moved to Oregon, but they never let me tell them what happened. I never went back to the canyon, and while curiosity sometimes gets the best of me, I don't think I ever will. Second story. The shadow is outside my window, and it's telling me to wake up. It didn't take me long to realize things were off. It was a place I had been so many times before, yet could never put my finger on, far too typical to identify, at least, that That's what I always told myself as I clenched my fists and snapped my eyes shut to drown out the noise. Everything seemed warped, so close to reality, yet too sterile. Empty. The walls of the houses which dotted the hilltop of the vibrant green hill were too white. The roofs too cartoonishly unrealistic to be a mirror image of what I knew. Everything was off. I began my long, slow journey up the hill, only to find that instead of getting closer, things seemed to pull back further and further away, until they became a mere blip in the distance. Every time I tried to catch up with it, it receded more. But I was soon distracted by the ringing, a daily occurrence now. It hung in the air like feedback from a microphone, overwhelming my senses and only getting louder once I clasped my hands over my ears and willed it to stop. Things went to black. Seconds later, my eyes opened. I was lying on my back, hands by my side, and eyes firmly focused on the too blue sky. A shadow kneeled beside me, asking me if I was all right and telling me of the fall I took, but it wasn't a normal voice. Something distorted, seemingly close and far away at the same time, uttered without lips moving a muscle. I tried to tilt my head and make eye contact with the thing, but there were no eyes to do so with. All the figure was made of was darkness, a mere shape, not a being, but yet it continued to speak in a low and practically incomprehensible whisper. All I could make out were the words "wake up," repeated again and again at random intervals. Things began to warp, another trick of the eye, but feeling ever so real as I shook, the sensation of falling engulfing me before my eyes snapped shut a second time. When I opened them, the figure was gone. I woke up. Properly now, I woke up in my bed as per usual. It took a moment to process it all, but I somehow mustered the courage to rise to my feet and open the shutters, revealing a rolling landscape crested by the houses which dotted the hilltops for as long as I could remember. It didn't occur to me at the time that I had never seen anyone enter or leave for that matter. I made myself a cup of tea, a light blend to avoid being sick. I felt strangely dizzy in a way I couldn't exactly describe, but made everything around me seem off. Pictures hung differently to how they used to in the hallways, which somehow felt longer, unnaturally so. At the time, again, I thought nothing of most of it, and resolved to simply enjoy my cup of tea by the windows, watching the houses as still and empty as ever. A chill descended upon the room, but my eyes remained fixated on the house. Watching, now, with a twisted sense of discomfort. This wasn't my house. This wasn't my village. I couldn't see it, but I could feel the shadow grow around me and cast the same warped images on the tile ground. That was yesterday. I'm in a motel now, far away from where I first saw it. I took the first train out of the village and headed to Redacted, Yorkshire, on account of having family nearby. I'll visit them tomorrow, and they've agreed in advance to keep me safe at their house. That's if I make it there. I can hear it again outside my window, tapping on the glass. The shadow is there, and it's telling me to wake up. Third story. Skinwalker sighting. The haunting of the Navajo reservation. I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, aliens, monsters, they were all just stories to me. But after what I experienced in the Southwest, my perspective on the unknown has been forever altered. I was on a road trip with my best friend, Jake. We had decided to take a detour through the Navajo reservation in Arizona, mainly because of the scenic beauty and the rich history of the area. We had heard tales of skinwalkers, but we laughed them off. They were just myths, right? Our first day on the reservation was uneventful. We visited a few local spots, interacted with some of the locals, and set up camp near a canyon. As night fell, we sat around our campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the serenity of the desert. Around midnight, Jake decided to turn in. I stayed up, mesmerized by the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, and I felt a profound sense of peace. That is, until I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon. I froze, thinking it might be a coyote or a mountain lion. But then I heard a voice. It was distorted, as if someone was speaking through a broken radio, but it was unmistakably Jake's voice. "Come here," it beckoned. Confused, I turned to our tent. Jake was sound asleep. The voice called out again, this time from the opposite direction. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the source. What I saw will haunt me forever. Standing on a ridge was a figure. It looked like a man, but its limbs were elongated, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It wore tattered clothing, and its skin was a mottled gray. But the most disturbing part was its face. It was Jake's face. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The creature mimicked Jake's voice again. "Come here." It took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my arm. Looking down, I saw a deep scratch, blood oozing out. The creature had marked me. I bolted to the tent, shaking Jake awake. "We need to go. Now," I hissed. As we sped away in our car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature stood in the middle of the road, watching us, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town. We checked into a motel, and I spent the night researching skinwalkers. The legends said they were witches who could take the form of animals or people, using their voices to lure victims. The next few nights were restless. I'd wake up to that same distorted voice calling my name, and the scratch on my arm seemed to burn and throb. It was clear that the creature had not only marked me, but was now haunting my every move. Jake and I decided to consult a local Navajo elder. He told us that by interacting with the Skinwalker, I had inadvertently invited it into my life. The only way to rid myself of its torment was to confront it and perform a purification ritual. With heavy hearts, we returned to the reservation. The confrontation with the Skinwalker was terrifying, but with the elder's guidance, we managed to complete the ritual. The haunting ceased, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. The Southwest is beautiful, but it holds secrets that are beyond comprehension. And I'll never set foot on the Navajo reservation again. To all of you reading this, please be careful when you venture into unknown territories. Some legends are rooted in truth, and some nightmares are very, very real. Fourth story, Skinwalker. When I was a toddler on my grandmother's property, I would have horrible nightmares of my toys killing me. They repeated again and again. It would only happen on her property. When I moved in with her at 5 years old, and it started again, and my terror turned into hell when my toys would make noises through the night, I banished them to the back shed. The first time I encountered one was in Pass Creek by Castlegar, British Columbia, after I moved into my grandmother's from foster care. She was very cruel to me, so I stormed out of her trailer at the age of 6 and headed down the road to cool off. It was a bright summer day. About 2 blocks away, thick forested community. I felt uneasy but saw nothing. Back then, the trees were cleared nicely, and I could see for a ways into the forest in the direction I felt watched from. I continued walking, and I heard a branch snap. I turned quickly and saw a blur of coyote leap clear across the road and make no noise in the thicker bush that it was heading and disappeared into. I was immediately paralyzed in fear. I felt I couldn't go back or forward, or I would be dead, so I stood paralyzed, hoping that someone would drive by. Sure enough, a man drove by, and I begged him to drop me off back at home. No one believed me. I believe the second encounter may have happened the same year. My neighbor and I were playing beside my trailer in the forest, which was 20 feet from the trailer. Her mom called her to go home for dinner, so I continued to play in the tree lane. From behind me, I was facing the trailer. I heard my neighbor's voice say my name, but it was way up, so high. She was shorter than me, and this was halfway up a tree high. I was shocked, looked behind me, and no one was there. Once again, I was trapped, paralyzed in fear. It took me everything to break free of the paralysis and run. I called her as soon as I got inside to be sure it wasn't some prank, and she answered, irritated that she would talk to me later, and hung up. I told no one, not until I was an adult in my mid-20s. My sleep paralyses started when I was 10 on that property. It would be a shadow, darker than the dark room around us. I'd be paralyzed, but I'd somehow instinctively close my eyes and calm myself, which would release me, and it would disappear. When I was a teen, I skipped school a handful of times to get assessed by mental health. I was concerned I had a condition that made me see and hear things, especially because I almost always felt watched. They assessed that I had no condition of the sort. Now move forward to my 20s. I'm now disabled from loose joints and in a dark place because I had to return to my grandmother's property. I decided to move into her shed. It was barren. My mother was now living there too, and she had put me through disgusting things my whole life. And because I was trapped in my bed, she became even more heartless. At this point, I had learned that to take my sleep paralyses, I had to have music on when I slept. I would often wake up and it had been turned off. One night, I woke up in a daze. I heard my grandmother saying my name again and again. At first, she sounded urgent, but then it twisted into a snarled voice. It was inhuman, and it was standing outside above the shed between her trailer and mine. My cat was freaked out. I calmed my nerves and went back to sleep. I was spooked too, but what could I do? Eventually, I told my mother about my experiences, and she was shocked. She believed me, but hadn't experienced anything like that. I figure we all had to have, but never said anything. Not long after, during nighttime, I heard something with strong claws, 2 hands, claw all the way up my shed on the side of the forest, from the bottom to the top. It would take 4 of me to reach the tip, standing on each other's shoulders. I'm 5'7". My cat heard it too and was freaked. Something ate her soon after that. I heard it happen. Then the breaking point. My mother pushed too far for too long, and I broke. At this point, I started speaking to myself, and it eventually felt like something was listening to me. It gave me comfort to feel that I wasn't alone anymore, having been in excruciating pain for a year at that point and very lonely. Then I asked it to punish her for all she had done to me. Within a week, I saw a cop car pull up to the property. I didn't want to come out and bother with it. I waited until they left and went into the trailer. My mother was freaked out. She is an ignorant man hating alpha type. She doesn't show fear ever, so she can keep her mask of strength on. She said this large elk creature that teeked of putrid flesh came to her and told her it would kill her by tearing her limbs from her body slowly. My mother was never the same ever since. She went insane. It took me a long time to put it together because once she went insane, it all got very busy until we had to push her from the home. Services here could do nothing because she would act sane when police showed up. It was bad. About half a year after that, I went from the trailer to the shed after dark against my better judgment, and I saw a powerful white light coming from behind the shed. I could tell it was high up based on where the shadows were, and I could tell there were many lights due to how many perfectly still shadows behind each tree there were. Of course, I want to go see, but I ran inside instead and was so scared it was going to come through the window. No vehicles could make it back there. Thick forest. There was a steep bank between the Paroepity and the forest. No other paths to get there. Now, my partner has got a new job on native land. He's been seeing this fox. The first time we were talking on the phone on night shift, and I started feeling really out of it. My body felt like it was detached. My mind was growing dizzy by the second. I told him, but soon after, he saw a fox and was addicted to it. I tried not to be rude because it was a cute encounter, but my situation was worsening. I was getting really faint and dizzy, nauseous. I had to get off the phone. It didn't take us long to realize what it was. It had hollowed out dark eyes and looked sickly. It would run from one end of camp like 50 miles in short periods. He'd see it again and again all night. I couldn't be on the phone with him when he saw it. He would try to drive far away from it if he was going to make a call and eat up our calling times. I started having blackouts and caused myself a significant amount of harm. It knows he knows. We all know. As long as he is at work, things happen here and there for him. His stuff being thrown off counters. One time, he fell asleep and didn't remember doing it during his shift. It was in the same place he saw the fox for the first time. My partner thinks it's after me because I'm clairvoyant. I have to sage every day, and sometimes that doesn't feel like it's enough. I want to keep my partner safe. How do I keep him safe? What is it going to do if it doesn't get what it wants? Fifth story. My childhood friend, James, was very good at voice impersonations. When I was in fourth grade, I met this kid called James. He was a little weird, quiet more than anything, but once I got to know him, he seemed like a chill dude. The thing that stood out to me the most was how good he was at voice impersonations. A little too good. In fact, I would have mistaken his voice acting for the person he was imitating if it wasn't for the fact that it came out of his mouth. However, there was one incident that made me want to stay away from this kid. Typing this out 15 years later, it still sends shivers down my spine. I still don't have an explanation for it, and quite frankly, I'd rather not have one. It was the night before Christmas break, December 12th in my school. As usual, we would go out to have snowball fights and go downhill with a sledge. You know, normal kid shit. As I was collecting snow, I got a call from distance. "Hey, Thomas, time to go home. Let's go." It sounded exactly like my mom. But when I turned around, I saw James giggling while hiding behind a mountain of snow. That was strange. I could have sworn that voice came from at least 30 feet away, but looking at James, he was definitely no farther than 6 feet. "Geez, I thought you were my mom for a sec," I said, pouting. James burst out laughing. "Got you again. You're so easy to trick sometimes." Shut up. I was a little pissed at how good his impersonations were, but then again, it was funny to troll other people with it, especially the teachers. More time passed by, and eventually the teacher actually did call us over to let us know that my mom was picking us up. Our plan was to have a sleepover before Christmas break began. My mom picked us up in her car and drove us home. We were left alone with a babysitter for the night, since she had to go work on her afternoon job plus her night shift. She was a single mother juggling 3 jobs, so it isn't necessarily easy for her. James and I were in the playroom for a while before nighttime came. Bedtime was coming up, but knowing James, he was going to find a way to stay up and perform some of his shenanigans. Our babysitter, Jackie, walked in and tucked us into bed, both mattresses on the floor, before turning off the lights and shutting the door. It was silent for a good few minutes before James' intrusive thoughts got the better of him. "Psst, Thomas," he whispered. "You up?" I turned around to face him. "Yeah, what's up?" Even though it was dark, I could sense James' devious grin. Clearly he thought of some crazy idea. Clearing his throat, he spoke. "Want to play a game?" His voice caught me off guard. He perfectly impersonated the voice of my crush at the time, Hannah. Again, I could have mistaken it for her if it wasn't for the fact that I could see James' face right in front of me. "You asshole. Why would you use her voice on me like that?" I slapped his shoulder. He had his face buried in his pillow, holding his laughter. James' voice went back to normal. "Let's play Find and Listen," he proposed. For context, Find and Listen was a game James made up when we first met. Ick if he had that idea before, but I'd rather not know. The game was that you would stand in the middle of a dark hallway and see what your eyes would start making up to scare the shit out of you. It was a really weird game, I know, but we were kids and James was, well, James, so I went along with it with my naive mind. "You should go first," said James, grinning. "I'll buy you a pack of Oreos if you do." "Fine," I replied, getting up. Tiptoeing, I peeked under the door to see if Jackie was still awake. To our amusement, all the lights of the house were turned off and I couldn't hear the TV, so I slowly creaked the door open. The coast was clear. Taking a deep breath, I stood in the middle of the hallway in silence, staring into darkness. It was silent for the first few minutes. Even James, who would usually already be laughing his ass off, was completely quiet. Besides the dark walls getting bigger and smaller as I looked around, nothing abnormal happened at first. The first weird thing came soon after. Slight breathing was being heard from far away. It wasn't any breathing I recognized, though. Eventually the sound went from breathing to a subtle groan, a very, very deep groan. I started feeling pressure on my chest, as if someone's entire weight was slamming against it. My breath shortened, body shaking. Whatever I was feeling, I certainly didn't think that I was safe at that very moment. As time went on, my heartbeat increased by the minute until eventually I could feel it in my throat. Um, James, are you still there? I'm scared. I whimpered, my body shaking even more in discomfort. He didn't respond, but I knew he was there because I saw his silhouette still laying down on the bed, sitting crisscrossed. I then felt something brush my shoulder. Jolting, I turned around to see nothing but the other side of the dark hallway. James, I said, trying to hold the lump of tears in my throat. Again, no response. No matter where I was turning around, I could feel a massive presence behind me, a pressure that I never felt before. I closed my eyes and curled into a ball. However, the pressure only got worse. James, can the game end now? I asked, a tear forming in my eye. This time I did get a response, but it wasn't James' voice. It was soft, a girl's voice. It had a slight echo to it. I thought you were having fun, it said. James, seriously, stop. I said a bit louder. The pressure from behind me switched to right in front of me. I could feel something right in front of me, staring at me with an intense glare. Hot breath simmered across my cheeks. It smelt bad, horrific even. Come on, why don't we play together? Asked the same female voice again. A gentle hand ran its fingers across my shoulder. I tensed up my whole body, holding my breath. Even though I was used to James' impersonations, this presence felt different. Paranormal. The voice then went from a gentle, female voice to a deep, threatening growl. It's okay, it said. Suddenly, I began feeling lightheaded. My consciousness began leaving me. It was a strange feeling I can't yet comprehend, even after so many years. The best way I could describe it is when you start seeing stars and feeling lightheaded after getting up too fast, combined with my head getting pulled upwards. I gasped and opened my eyes, and there it was. A dark figure with piercing red eyes and sharp teeth grinning right at me, its face longer than a console table. I let out a blood-curdling scream, tears running down my face. Almost instantly, the lights to the hallway turned on and Jackie, the babysitter, ran up to me, asking if I was okay in a panic. I was paralyzed, petrified. My eyes were widened, body still shaking, tears still dripping down my cheek. Next to Jackie was James, his face looking just as terrified. However, something about him felt off. His eyes were glowing a little more than usual. Not too much, but in a weird way, as if the glow was residue, slowly diminishing into nothing. Although barely noticeable, I could see it. James' glare was too familiar to me. But if that was the case, then what did I see? Why did it look so different to the James the first knew? I couldn't sleep that night. I insisted that the lights in the house stayed on until my mom came to pick me up. I slept next to her that night, and James was sent home early. He didn't come back after Christmas break. No one knows why James' family decided to leave without saying a single word after that. Not only did he leave the school, but the city. Strangely enough, no one has heard from him since. 15 years later, I still can't explain what happened that night. Like James' eyes glowing, his overly perfect voice impersonations, his strange personality, the eerie games that he liked to play. But one thing's for sure, I'd rather not have an answer to any of it. Sixth story. It's 2:25 a.m. There's a man standing in my backyard. He isn't moving. He's just standing there, right outside the tree line. I have to take my dog out, but I'm way too freaked out to step outside. My dog wakes me up most nights around 2 a.m. or so to let him out. He sleeps in my bed with me. I know, probably gross, but I love him and I can't help it. I don't want him doing his business in my bed, so I always get up and take him outside. But whatever that thing is standing out there, I don't want to come near it. Here's the thing about my dog. He's 15, and this year his age has caught up to him. He's gone partially deaf and has developed cataracts. He doesn't bark or react to things like he used to. It's just a sad truth of him getting older. I still love him the same, and I'm lucky he's lived this long, but I don't trust his senses like I used to. I don't know if he sensed what's out there. I headed to the back door, flicking on lights so my dog and I could watch our steps when I spotted it. It was facing my house, just standing like an obsidian statue at the edge of the tree lean. My blood ran cold, and my body reacted faster than my brain. I bolted away from the door and shut off all the lights I had turned on. Primal instinct had kicked in. I crawled back to my bedroom, moving as quietly as I could and avoiding windows. I've been hiding behind my bedroom curtains since then, trying to make sense of what's going on. After giving myself a few minutes to breathe, I poked my head out from behind the curtain to see if it was still there. I half expected to see its face pressed against the window, staring back at me, but it's still standing there in the middle of my yard. I can see it clearly from where I am. My body is tense, every hair on its end, every nerve alive with fear. There's this suffocating sense of dread. I can't help but feel like I'm being watched, even though I can clearly see it still facing my back door. I can't shake the feeling that it knows where I am, that it saw me turn on the lights, that it's waiting. I have decided that I am going to call the cops. Most likely case is that it's just one of my neighbors. There's a few elderly couples living on my street, and I've heard stories of old people wandering from their homes, lost and confused. But I don't know. I've never seen anyone stand that still. If it is one of my neighbors, they might need help. I don't know if I'm just trying to convince myself that it's not supernatural. I've heard stories of skinwalkers, creatures, all sorts of things. I've seen videos of them on TikTok and Instagram reels that my friends send me, trying to scare me. I try not to think about them too hard, because the more I think about it, the more I freak myself out. Maybe that's what I'm doing now. But there's just something about the way it's standing there, unnervingly still, like it's something that shouldn't be in my backyard, something that might not even be human. Whatever or whoever it is, the cops can deal with it. If this or something similar has happened to anyone before, I'd appreciate some advice on how to handle this situation and if I'm doing the right thing. Maybe I just want to feel less alone right now. I can't ignore the feeling that whatever is outside is dangerous. For now, I'll stay behind my bedroom curtains keeping watch. I'm calling the cops right after making this post. Whether it's just my paranoia or something more, I'd rather deal with the mess of cleaning up after my dog than whatever is standing out there in the dark. The cops showed up at 2:57. Thank you to the commenter who suggested I talk to the cops through the door. I told them the situation and they went around back to check it out, but when I looked out the window again, it was gone. The cops searched all around the premise, but couldn't find anything weird. No sign of a person, no footsteps, nothing. They must think that I am crazy. I don't care. The only security I feel right now is in knowing that all of my doors and windows are locked, so there's no way that it got inside with me. I just pray to God it doesn't come back. I don't think I'll be getting any sleep tonight. 7th story. I live in rural Scotland, and I'm getting scratching at my door. So this happened about 3 months back. It stuck with me, and I just want to get the whole story off my chest, to be honest. I live in a rural area in the northwest coast of Scotland. The scenery is beautiful, with lochs and bends, lakes and hills for the non-Scots, right outside my door. The nearest village is about a 15-minute drive away, and only has a few hundred people itself. Other than that, there are a few other houses sparsely dotted about, but the closest neighbor is still a mile or two away from me. My house is next to the loch, which I'll fish in from time to time, and a large field which acts as my backyard. The field is then abruptly met with a tree line, which is the entrance to one of the largest wooded areas in Scotland. That's more or less the layout of the gaff. Other than that, it's just me living there. My other half passed away a few years ago, and since I fell into a bit of a depression. It was a tough time in my life, but I got through it, especially after I adopted the wee man, Alfie. Alfie's a border terrier and acts as my best pal. He goes everywhere with me and has really been the difference between life and death at times. Because we're so isolated up here, the usual routine is just before bed, about 9 or 10 p.m., I'll open the back door for Alfie to run around the field for a bit. Get out any last-minute shites or pisses. It's Scotland, so naturally 360 days of the year are freezing. Because of this, I'll shut the door behind him and wait for him to come and scratch the door after to let him in. So this one night, April 25th this year, things were as norma. I was sat watching some rubbish on Netflix, Alfie next to me. The wee man got up and started stretching, so I made a mental note to go and let him out. I finished watching whatever I was watching, and went and opened the back door. The night was, of course, pitch black, and I could just see the outline of the trees in the tree line. I lit up a quick cigarette, bad habit, I know, and smoked it quickly before closing the door. I went and did some bits and bobs, closing curtains and doing some dishes when I heard Alfie scratching away at the door. It had been about 5 or 10 minutes, so I went to go and let him in again. I put the plate I was cleaning down and began walking down the corridor to the back door. I yawned on the way and gave Alfie a rub on the head as I walked past. I thought about having another cigarette, but I gave Alfie a rub on the head? The thought stopped me dead in my tracks. I turned back, and sure enough, Alfie was lying snoozing in the corridor. Weird. I could have sworn I heard him scratching on the door. He must not have gone out when I opened the door, and then I imagined the scratching. I turned around again to head back the way I came, and chills ran down my spine. I heard the scratching again. Now I knew for a fact it wasn't Alfie. He was lying right next to me. I also knew for a fact I hadn't imagined it. I waited a few more seconds, and the scratching persisted. I instantly felt my heart drop to my stomach. I felt queasy. What was scratching at my door? I decided to go upstairs to my bedroom because I knew I could get a view of the back door and what was at it from that window. I cautiously crept up the stairs and then slowly pulled the curtains back just enough to peek through. I promise on my late Eileen's grave, this next bit is completely true. I watched in horror as a fully grown man who was perched on all fours began to scratch at my back door again. This sight nearly made me faint. I'm not a small man, and I chop and deliver firewood for a living, so I'm pretty strong, but just pure creepiness of seeing this shook me to my core. I couldn't see his face that well, but I could make out he was maybe 30 to 40 years old, and was maybe of Western Asian descent, with brown skin and a scraggly black beard. A point that may be relevant is that my particular area of Scotland is very white. About 99%, I think, and everyone knows each other anyway. No one even knows someone of that description in any of the local villages within 40 or 50 miles. I also could make out a grin on the man's face. It looked like he was trying to stifle it, however. Like he was excited, but was trying to keep himself composed. The scratch noises were indistinguishable from Alfie's, so I immediately knew he must have had long fingernails. He scratched the door a couple more times over the next minute or so. After this, he crawled down the 3 or 4 stairs back to the back garden and began crawling in circles. This image was even more sickening than the last. A grown man crawling on the floor like a dog. What the hell? That was until he burst out into a sprint. He had quickly risen from his crawl, and taking the 10 to 15 meters, he was away as a run-up. A run-up to charge straight into the back door. I fitted those doors myself, so I trusted the hinges they were built on. And rightly so, the man bounced right off the door, but the sound immediately alerted Alfie. Alfie started barking uncontrollably, and I took this as a chance to say something too. "Get out of here, mate. I can see ya." I shouted down. The man didn't even flinch. He just stood up from the floor and brushed himself off. He didn't even look up at me. He then just turned around and walked calmly further into the backyard. Further and further until he hit the tree line and still kept walking. The guy had only been wearing a hoodie and dark gray tracksuit bottoms, so he must have been freezing. To then venture off into the dark woods, alone, so carelessly, the whole situation had me equally as confused as it did terrified. I called the local village's police station. They said they'd sent someone out to talk to me. When the officer got here, I told him the story and recounted the man to the best of my abilities, but after I finished recounting the tale, all I got was "Are you drinking again, Derek?" I couldn't believe it. I had had a wee bit of an issue a few years back after Eileen, but put the booze down and been sober for the last 12 months. He clearly just didn't believe me, didn't know if I'd believe me either, to be honest. He left, and it was just me and Alfie again. Neither of us slept a wink the rest of the night. I also broke my sobriety for the first time that night, which is not something I'm proud of. And that was that. Didn't hear anything about a body in the woods. Didn't hear anything about a man of that description. Didn't hear anything about the same thing happening to the neighbors. I couldn't believe it. The more I went over it in my head, the more it began to terrify me. That man must have been watching me and noticed my habit of letting Alfie in when he scratched the door for however many nights before he tried it himself. Was just lucky Alf decided not to go out that night. The part that really terrifies me is that he never knew I was watching him. So when he crawled down and kept his acting like a dog act facade going, that was just for him. He was acting like that, thinking no one was watching. I've spent the past months combing over all the pictures of any escaped mental patients or convicts over the last 20 years, but nothing. It's almost as if the guy... I hear the scratching again. I hear the scratching at my door again, and Alfie is at my feet. It sounds slower this time and deeper into the wood of the door. I'm gonna go and confront this bastard. Wish me luck. I'll update when it's over. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.